Task force had set out from bases in Norway through the North Sea to attack a convoy to Russia. Here's Rader. There had been a breakdown in the land wires in northern Norway. Instead of receiving the joyful word of the resounding success which he expected, the first details Hitler received came from British broadcasts, which stated that the German ships had been driven off after an unsuccessful attack and that the convoy had got through unscathed. Hitler thereupon flew into an uncontrolled rage, claiming that information had been deliberately withheld from him. He announced his intention of immediately having all the heavy ships laid up and recorded in the war diary his view that the heavy ships were utterly useless. For one whole hour, Hitler, in the presence of Field Marshal Keitel, gave me a thorough dressing down. He attacked the Navy in a vicious and impertinent way. He disparaged its founding, belittled its every role since 1864, and stated that except for the submarines, the entire history of the German Navy had been one of futility, needing the Air Force to protect them every time they went to sea. He stated that the large ships no longer had any operational value and that they should be laid up so their guns could be put to good use elsewhere. The whole diatribe was intended to insult me personally. Realizing that his naval career was effectively over, Admiral Rader offered his resignation as Commander-in-Chief. Here's what he said. For the date of my relief, I requested January 30, 1943, the 10th anniversary of my service as Commander-in-Chief under Hitler's government. And the selection of this date would make my relief understandable to the public, so the outside world would not know it occurred over an unbridgeable difference of opinion. And Hitler thought it important for everyone to think we were still on the best of terms. Hitler asked Rader to recommend two choices to succeed him. Not surprisingly, Rader's first choice was an admiral he regarded as having a balanced view of the composition of the German Navy. His second choice was Admiral Donitz, who at the time had clearly won Hitler over to his vision of U-boat dominance. In his book, Rader is sharply critical of Hitler's wasting time and resources, planning Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain that was scrapped after Goring failed to achieve air mastery over the British Channel. Rader says he warned Hitler of its futility and of the Navy's utter inability to land the necessary troops and war machines across the Channel. He also recounts warning Hitler that Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia, although mostly a ground war, would necessarily divert naval vessels desperately needed in the line of Donitz's complaints. The tragedy of German U-boats in the Second War is that leaders of the German state and the German Navy, and by the way, in his book, he avoids, there is no doubt that the submarine was the greatest threat to Allied victory over the Allies. Let us never forget that the initial successes and surprises effected by the U-boats fell not far short of rendering Germany invincible on the sea, while her armies were carrying everything before them on the continent of Europe. Churchill, always have to look at Churchill. The Battle of the Atlantic was the dominating factor all through the war. Never for one moment could we forget that everything happening elsewhere on land, at sea, or in the air depended ultimately on its outcome. Of 1,170 U-boats built for Donitz, only 863 ever became operational. Of those, he lost 753, 603 at sea, the rest by air attack and mines. His U-boats sank 2,759 vessels, mostly merchantmen, but 148 warships, including aircraft carriers, battleships, escort carriers, light cruisers, and lesser vessels. The fate of raiders' capital ships. On the day after Christmas in 1943, the Scharnhorst, you got a picture of the camouflage Scharnhorst, was sunk in Norway by HMS Duke of York.